Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and as always, I'm here with my good friend, colleague, and co host, Jim Gurley. And once again, Jim, as we say pretty much every time, we had a pretty interesting pregame. Although I will say it started out with a little bit of a melancholy tinge to it, and we're going to see what we can do to get some levity out of a fairly, not uplifting topic. And the topic, I guess, is going to be trauma. And in the pregame, we talked about this in the context of our age and in midlife, and attributed some of this to that, but not all of it, because I think trauma impacts all of us. And as it pertains to our flywheel of life and the five areas, I think this one applies as they all do to all of them, but particularly to the relationship side, our relationship with other people, because we also talked about some of the things in our respective families, and as we get older, as everyone knows, more people start to become infirm, and people pass away, and family gatherings become a little more interesting, I guess, on some level. But yeah, we've got a framework Jim brought to the conversation, the 5F framework, and he was listening to a podcast, and I think the author of the podcast was a therapist of some kind, so I think his opinion is credible. But Jim likes frameworks. I like frameworks. I think everybody benefits from the structure and the contextual benefit of a framework. So I'm going to read a few definitions at some point. But Jim, how would you like this thing to begin? Do you want me to read the definition of trauma response, or do you want to kind of infuse a little bit of your opinion before we go there?
Well, I'll just carry on with what your earlier points was, how this fits into our framework of these five areas of our life. Again, no particular order, but our relationship with others, which what we're going to talk about today, is big, and we divide that into two subcategories, and that's relationship with men versus women. That's our fathers, that's our mothers, that's our partners, brothers, sisters. There's different relationships. Again, our relationship with money. Typically, that's a abundance or scarcity based on a lot of different things, but definitely money and trauma is related, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are triggers. Um, our other, we talk about our profession uh, and being self-employed versus working for a company. Our well-being, this is absolutely related to our health, right? Our mental health, our well-being. Sometimes it affects us physically. And then, of course, our childhood, which a lot of these things, that's the basis for a lot of these things. But this particular framework, very related to self-awareness in the middle of our wheel of life, our the framework that we create for the podcast. There's many selves. I think we're about up to about a library of about 30 or 40, but the first one is self-awareness, being self-aware of this. We all have responses to events that happen, but I think this particular podcast I listened to, I appreciated the framework because he went deep into the what I refer to as the five F's, which is the following. So typically, when something happens, a trauma response is fight, which is to face any perceived threat aggressively. I would say we're gonna have some fun with this. I would say that's very consistent with my personality over the years. My first thing would be to fight. I think, yeah, to your point earlier, Mark, as we get older, we become more self-aware of these things, but we also have different reactions based on different circumstances, and that does change. The other one is we freeze, the inability to move or act against a threat. Sometimes you do, you just freeze. You don't know what to do. The trauma is just to lock up. Use a sports analogy. I think this can work to that too. It's your there's the game time response, and then there's life responsive events that happen. Fawn, to please someone to avoid conflict. I've been known to do that, especially later on in life through some conditioning. But yeah, you try to be nice. You think that's the way, even though it's probably not in your best interest. But you do that. Flop is to collapse, become unresponsive, or faint. Kind of an interesting. That's kind of some people do faint under
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
difficult circumstances, and
Yeah.
then this is one I think I appreciate this because I think more of us do this than we realize. Flight, to run away from danger or threats. I would say most people run. That's the typical response. But
Yeah, I think as you're reading them, I think to myself, I've done all of those. I think
yeah,
that, as you alluded to earlier, probably my primary response is to fight.
hmm
And I say that in the context of maybe protection. And I was talking about my kids. When anything threatens my kids, I tend to protect, but I think that's a form of fighting.
hmm
Um, but I think we've all done all five. We probably have a predominant choice, but I think depending on the circumstances, I used to say, if I saw a kid in the street and there was a car coming, I would like to think that I would run out there and push the kid out of the way to save his life, and perhaps sacrifice my own. But I don't know if I would unless I was in that circumstance. And
hmm
I think that we're all that way. I think that there's a part of us that says, well, I think that I would, I wish that I would, I hope that I would, but until that circumstance hits, because trauma can take on all kinds of different forms,
hmm
right? Trauma can be bumping your knee, or it can be losing a loved one, right?
hmm
It can take all different shapes. Let me read the trauma response definition that
Yeah,
you
yeah, if you
found.
could, Mark, and just again to agree with what you're saying in the
Hmm.
context of today's conversation, we're gonna have some fun with it, but it is people, because there's many different responses you can have in a car accident, but this is a response to people that we have relationships with, or we become part of that. We're attached to the outcome,
Hmm.
and then, like as you said, there's the initial response of trauma, but then there's also maybe the long term. So I think we have to divide it up into two areas. Like your initial response may be one thing, but then your secondary response may be different as you take action to try it. In your case, you mentioned you go into um, a mode of fixing the problem, or you go into taking control of the problem to make it better. I also think these are we avoid these a lot. This is back to being self-aware. They're happening, and we're navigating around parts of our life to avoid them. And if we're not aware of them, then that's always not in our best interest. So some of this
Yeah, I
is
think
just reactions or just emotions.
no, it's a great point. I think there is the initial reaction, which is probably substantially emotional and
Yeah.
reactionary. And then as time elapses, and what happens with time elapsing is you get more context, and
hmm
you get to see how other people are responding, and
hmm
and you maybe you're filling the gaps, and other people are filling some of those gaps, so part of your response becomes less necessary when you get the
hmm
support of other people, or in the absence of other people's support, perhaps you're required to do more of what you're doing. So yeah, there's definitely that initial immediate reaction
Yeah.
to trauma, and then that over time how it kind of settles in based on circumstance and context. So I
Yeah.
agree.
And then like you said, there's our own response to trauma, but then also patterns of other people. So that could be somebody close to you. It could be because if you see them, um, a pattern of how they respond to the same uh, event or the same scenario, then observation of how people respond is also very
Yeah.
telling.
Yeah, and I think that as you're talking, I'm thinking our responses can also impact the way other people respond.
No
So
question. No question.
our response might be intentionally to get someone else to respond a certain way,
Yep.
or not respond a certain way. So
Yep.
there, I can see where it'd be very easy to get to see manipulation in all of these
Yeah,
responses
yeah.
as
Again,
well.
that's such an important point you made, Mark, especially in parenting, because the personality of a child will be developed by how their um, mother or father responds to something. They'll
Absolutely.
modeling is parenting is modeling. So if they see you respond to something that way, then that as their brain is developing, that's the way they respond to things. That's the old, if you're driving and somebody cuts you off and you yell at them, hey, f you,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Fast forward 15 years, your son or daughter will be doing the same thing. It's
Yeah, it's funny. I gotta share this. I gotta share this quick story, and I think I've shared it with you before. But I was driving around with my son a couple of years ago,
yeah,
windows down. It was around Christmas, and we're in Orlando, so Christmas is sunny and warm. But
yeah.
as I cut this lady off unintentionally, and she just screamed at me, and I was here. My son was next to me, and she was so my son was in between me and her. So my
Uh-huh.
response was right in his face. And I, for some reason, when she yelled at me, I just looked over and I said, "Merry Christmas." And and she froze, dude. She had no fucking idea how to respond to
That's great.
that.
That's yeah. So be careful what you do. But yeah, so yeah, let's break these down. I think this the framework is good, and we'll learn lot about these five different responses.
Yeah. But I'm going to read the trauma response because I think it's important because of the first line. Trauma responses
Yep.
are automatic, instinctive reactions that the human body initiates when faced with overwhelming stress or threat. These reactions are adaptive mechanisms aimed at ensuring survival in the face of
Mm,
danger. So I think what I hear there is they're like say automatic and instinctive. There's no forethought to
mm,
them. You just react,
mm.
right?
Yeah,
And
interesting.
then context settles in, things maybe settle down or perhaps
Hmm.
escalate, and then that secondary thing that you were talking about first. But
Hmm.
yeah, I
Yeah,
like.
yeah. Overwhelming stress or threat. That's
Yep.
the context of this. Okay.
So
Yeah.
the impetus of the trauma response is survival, right?
Hmm.
That's the first notch. So
No,
yeah,
interesting.
yeah,
So
that's I
evolutionary. This goes back to
it's
our
caveman stuff.
ancestors. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
caveman stuff. This is
yeah,
always fun
yeah.
to extrapolate
So
from now to then.
so I'm going to read the all five. Let's take them one at a time, and then, like you
Okay.
say, let's break them down.
And
So the first one is fight. The fight response is characterized by a surge in adrenaline and a readiness to confront a perceived threat. This response manifests as aggression, anger, or a strong urge to resist and defend oneself. In a traumatic situation, a person exhibiting the fight response may become confrontational, argumentative, or even physically aggressive. This reaction is the body's way of feeling empowered in a situation that feels out of control. Boy, that's
wow.
frighteningly familiar.
I thought they were talking about me. I
Fortunately, I'm the only one that I don't do there is the physical confrontation. Everything else
oh
is
no, I did that too. I said most of my life. I'm happy to report that I don't do it as much as I once did. So but yes, I can relate to that. I think that if somebody really um, poked you the wrong way or something uh, was that emotional to you, then that would be response. Whether that's yelling at somebody, whether that's physically doing something in reaction. But I would say you see that quite often in kids too. Sometimes not
Yeah,
all, but some kids.
I think it's a human condition, but I also
Yeah,
think that as I was reading it and listening to you, I was thinking to myself, there are also people in this world in our lives that they can push our buttons better than anyone else, and
yeah.
they want to elicit this kind of response to get us in
Oh,
trouble
interesting. Yeah, they know they're saying it intentionally because they know they can get the
intentionally.
reaction.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think that's kind of important. It's not just how we react.
yeah,
What that's called pushing your buttons, right? Somebody is pushing your buttons. They know they're going to get that reaction. They're doing it intentionally because
yeah.
they want to trigger you to lose control. It's
Well,
also a strategy, right? Best way, like say in a negotiation, is to poke at somebody in a way where they lose their their emotions. They're not in control of their emotions because that's
they lose their objectivity and they become
they do.
emotional. Yeah,
Yeah, and their
yeah, no.
credibility. So
Well, I think if you can recognize when someone is trying to manipulate you and push
yep,
your buttons, you can fight the fight response, right? You can quell the fight response. But if you're unaware
yep,
of that, or you lose the ability, you lose your awareness of that because it's
you
so
do.
emotional, that can
Yeah,
get out of hand quick. Yeah,
yeah, good one.
yeah.
So
So the
uh,
next one is flight.
mhm.
And flight, on the other hand, is marked by the desire to escape or avoid a threatening situation. people experiencing the flight response might display behaviors such as running away, avoiding confrontation, or seeking physical or emotional distance. This reaction aims to remove oneself from danger or perceived harm to find safety and security. Yeah, I mean, those two, fight or flight,
Yeah.
are, people talk about those two all the time. So,
Mhm.
again, I think we all do this sometimes.
The flight is very powerful. Because I can't, I've done the extremes of all these probably, but the flight, as in just not saying anything, just
Hmm.
going silent, it's a complete power shift too. If
Hmm.
they've done something to get a reaction out of you, and instead of fighting, you just go silent or you don't react to them,
Hmm.
then that also puts you back in a position of control, or at least it delays the emotional
Well,
part.
it can
But I
do
do
it.
find most people will, and I consider this as cowards, where they won't even have a conversation. They just run away, and they don't have the courage to have an exchange of ideas to try to find a common ground.
Yeah,
I'd
it's
say
an
this is
interesting.
probably more common than not.
Yeah, I
People,
think I think the flight thing. I used to say, and I've told you this before. I can bring my ex-wife into this as well. But when we would get into arguments, there were three options, right? One was change the topic, and the other one was raise your voice, and the third one was flight, just take off. And
take off.
so
Yeah.
they are defense mechanisms for sure, but they also
Mhm.
are, to your point, I think they're a form of cowardice. And, avoiding
Yeah. Hey,
confrontation, I think just for the sake of avoiding confrontation is cowardly.
yeah. And back to behavior. If you have somebody that's more than one time, and it doesn't matter how escalated the situation is, but every time something goes wrong, they leave,
Hmm.
then that's, at least in my world, that's somebody that probably is not worth continuing to
Yeah,
try to work
you
through.
can't make any progress with
You
somebody
can't,
like that.
not if they're there. Yeah.
Yeah, you
And-
can't. So
yeah.
the third one is freeze. The freeze response involves feeling immobilized or stuck in a traumatic situation.
Mhm.
This reaction might involve a sense of numbness,
Yeah.
disassociation, or feeling paralyzed. It's the body's way
Yeah.
of playing dead, hoping that the threat will pass.
Yeah.
If one remains motionless, it's a common response when the perceived danger is too overwhelming to confront or escape from. That's animal kingdom stuff. Animals pretending to
Yeah.
be
But
dead, you know?
oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
but I can relate to this one too. I do think there's time when you just become stuck. You just freeze. You don't say anything.
Well,
You don't know what to say.
I think of war, and I
You're
think of,
paralyzed.
yeah,
Yeah.
massive, overwhelming force like D-Day or something. There were
Mm.
definitely soldiers that were like, man, everyone around me's dead.
Yeah.
I'm just going to play dead. So they walk right
Interesting.
past me.
Yeah.
So it can
Yeah.
be a survival thing too,
Yeah.
So,
But
but
I
yeah,
like the sports analogy because you're right. I've been in those games where some players just freeze. They just can't. They don't know what to do. They just freeze.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
um, and then there's other ones that they just fight, or they go into this mode. But I find I think I'm freezing more now than I've ever before because
Well,
it's overwhelming. There's so much going on.
some,
I feel paralyzed. I feel
yeah,
it's
I think
you get numb
sometimes.
because yeah, it's a sense of I like the descriptions. It's feeling paralyzed.
Well, I think in fairness to all of us, I think that sometimes you just need to pause. Sometimes you just
Yeah.
need a break to gather your thoughts or, just kind of collect yourself. And so
Hmm.
I think you said it earlier, there's two phases to these, right? Like if you're using any of these just to collect your thoughts, it's like, I am overwhelmed right now. I just need a moment. I just need a
Mhm.
breath. I just
Mhm.
need everyone to shut the fuck up for 1 second and I
Yeah.
can gather my thoughts. And then the second round of that is perhaps who you really are. So if you're
Mhm.
just buying yourself a little time, I understand. I can empathize with that.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I didn't think of it like that. But you can self-select the one that you feel is most appropriate for that moment. So you're buying some time, right? You're self-aware enough to say, "Hey, I'm in a mode of trauma, and as a result, I'm going to pick one of these five, and then I'm going to be aware of it, and then I'll make a decision after that. But the
Yeah.
initial response in is back to, like you said, self control. That, hey, I'm going to respond to one of these, but that doesn't mean it stops there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that you maybe you get to pick one, maybe you just default to one automatically. Maybe there's not enough time, and I think that probably both. But yeah, I have certainly I can remember many instances where I just needed a time, and I talk about pausing all the time in communication just to buy yourself some time to think,
Yep.
you
Hmm.
know, and trauma just escalates that the
Hmm.
severity of that response. But I think maybe you pick one, but maybe your mind just defaults to one based on your
Hmm.
childhood experiences and your circumstances, you know?
Yeah, we also talk about self forgiveness. So sometimes you just need to forgive yourself for being stuck. Maybe you
Yep.
just don't have an answer right now, and there's
Yep.
nothing wrong with that at that moment in time. You know, you're gonna have to get unstuck, but you have to be at least self aware enough that, hey, I'm in this freeze mode at the moment. I'm stuck, and then I'll get unstuck later. But right now, I need to
Yeah,
work
I
my
think
way
you
out of
can
this.
I
Yeah.
think you can remain personally accountable even if you opt into one of these five, as long
Yeah.
as over time you come back to it and say, look, I appreciate the pause. I needed that. I needed a little break for a sec. Let's get back in a discussion and resolve whatever this is now
Yeah.
that I'm back in an objective state. And I think
Mhm.
that's totally acceptable to me.
Yeah.
And the last one is flop. The flop response, also known as the appease or submit response, involves a state of surrender or total collapse in a traumatic
Did you do
situation.
four?
I think I did. Oh no, I skipped it. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
fawn. Fawn is number four.
Okay. Yeah.
So let me go back. Thank you for that. The fawn
Yeah.
response is characterized by a strong desire to please or appease others in the face of trauma. Individuals exhibiting the fawn response might engage in people pleasing behaviors, seeking to be agreeable and helpful, even to their detriment. This response often emerges from a deep seated need for social connection and safety, even if it means sacrificing personal boundaries. That one sounds a little manipulative to me.
I don't see it that way. It's interesting. I'm finding myself in a couple of these, but remember, this is not your normal state, and this at least the way he's presenting this. So yeah, you're being extra nice. That I don't know if it's because you don't know what to do, so you're being too nice. You're being too accommodating, uh, just because you're in a trauma response mode, and as a result, you're being way too generous, or you're being too accommodating in a situation that you normally would not be. So
Yeah, I think all of these are, at least to me, as we're talking about them and I'm listening to them, they're all like initial reaction to trauma. I'm not sure what to do. What are my options? Boom, pick one. All right, I
mhm.
got that one. I get to breathe. Things calm down a little bit, or they escalate, and I just need to get back to objectivity. I think
Yes,
picking one of these tools, I wouldn't fault anyone for picking one. I probably would only fault someone for hanging out there and staying there and never coming back, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
that's the second phase that you were talking about
yeah.
earlier.
These are also personalities. Some people, that's just how they deal with everything, right?
Yep.
They immediately start apologizing and accommodating,
Mm-hmm.
and it's again, it's not even their own self-interest to do that, but that's what they do, and and then worst of all, um, they'll regret it later. That they're not sincere about it. They'll do that
Well,
initially, and then they'll come back and then do something else. That's a passive aggressive or
yep.
some other
Yep.
disingenuous act, just because they were trying to again accommodate your feelings or appease you at the moment in time.
Well, and that's why I think that your second phase comment was so clear, so logical for me, because it's like, okay, well, if I pick one of these five to buy myself time to let things calm down or get back to some level of objectivity, but then I come back and say, look, sorry about that whatever that was, I needed that for a second. Let's come back to objectivity and let me take personal responsibility for whatever my responsibility is. That to me makes that's clear. That makes sense to me. But if you never
Mhm.
come back and you just
Yep.
keep playing that game and you deny what was happening, I think that's where problems arise.
Yeah, and being in that's insincerity too. You're not sincere
Yeah.
about what your intentions were or the outcome.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'll get to five, the
Oh,
flop. The flop, I always think about basketball or soccer when people just
oh,
flop, but also known as the appease or submit response involves a state of surrender or total collapse in a traumatic situation. This reaction is seen in individuals who feel completely overwhelmed and unable to fight, flee, or even freeze. It often involves feelings of helplessness, hopelessness, and a sense of resignation in the face of an insurmountable threat. Man, that's heavy.
yeah.
That's heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy because that's the context of this particular article. But again, I like the conversation because it applies. It doesn't have to be heavy. It could just be the initial, like we're establishing these two different levels of. It also is a great way to understand people. You don't know what they've been through in
Yep.
life. You don't know their circumstances, um, and you want to. I've learned you want to give them some space. To and give them a space, but also give them comfort to come back and have a conversation or an exchange of really what they want or a common ground.
No, it's a great point. I think that, we talk about this in the context of our reaction, but it's also consideration of the other person's reaction. And it's like
Yeah.
this is the beauty of this framework, at least for me in part, is that okay, to your point, I can now begin the process of saying, well, let me at least take the time to try and understand
Yeah.
maybe why this person reacted the way they did and where they
Hmm.
might be coming from rather than assume they're just avoiding something or pushing back on something,
Hmm.
freezing up about something or flopping about something. It's like, no, this is a mechanism of survival, right?
Hmm.
To buy myself the time. And again, we've all been in situations where we reacted to something just immediately and emotionally, and then after the fact, do we take responsibility for that? Maybe we apologize for that, maybe we add some context or explanation for it, and that's where the authenticity comes. I think that's where the
Yeah,
sincerity
yeah,
comes.
and empathy, right?
Yeah.
Um, Empathy for and a bit of humanity as well, because you just don't know sometimes, and that initial reaction, if you give them a little bit of time, in many cases, I think you've talked about it too, just how you greet somebody at a uh, in line or the cashier or somebody, they may be having a bad day or everybody's been treating them like shit that day. You let them have their initial response, but then come back to them, say something friendly or kind to them, and then all of a sudden you get a completely different response. The second one may completely
Yeah,
different.
I think to that's a great point. I think to that point, I think to understand and try and empathize with, I don't know why this is happening. I don't know why this person's responding this way, but I'm not going to assume that I do. I'm going to investigate if I care enough, and
Mhm.
I'm going to presume that there's an explanation for this rather than say this guy's just being an asshole or this girl's just being an asshole. So
Yeah,
yeah, empathy is a great result of some of this framework.
yeah. I dropped a note. You can read it. It's the last one I just put in there, but it speaks to this about empathy and experiences. But you can read it. I just put it in the chat. The last one.
Yeah, understanding the five trauma responses. So, understanding these various trauma responses is crucial in providing support and care for individuals who've experienced trauma. It's important to note that these responses are not consciously chosen, but are instinctive reactions of the nervous system. Empathy, patience, and support are key in helping individuals navigate their responses and recover from traumatic experiences. Yeah, no, that's money.
Yeah, it is.
Although I think we both know people that are like, okay, that's all true, but this person keeps doing the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah,
There's no apology, there's no ownership, there's no accountability. So
yeah.
I can see both sides of that coin.
Yeah, no self-awareness. Um, and this was the podcast, just again, give some credit where it's due. It's a PT Meal podcast. Again, it's a few years ago, so it's not nothing new, but I want to be respectful to the
Yeah.
person that put this framework together. Yeah, Mark, I think it was, like I said, I appreciate flushing this out in terms of, whether it's going on, being self-aware, whether it's going on in our own minds or just understanding humans. And we all have trauma. Trauma is part of being a human.
Yeah,
Um,
I think this idea that we really don't know what someone's going through, we really don't know what's going on in their life. I think that a level of awareness about that, walking into circumstances, whether they be confrontational or
mhm,
emotional or just business, maybe
mhm,
just a family gathering. I think if we continue to remind ourselves that, look, I don't know where this is coming from. I'm not going to assume the worst. I'm going to keep an open mind until it's proven to me that this is what it is, what it is,
mhm,
but I think that's a very challenging thing to do. It's very difficult to do on a consistent basis for me.
mhm.
So, but I think it's valuable.
Always comes back to the self, doesn't it, Mark? Always
It
comes
does.
back to the self in the center of the framework.
Well,
And
what do we have control over, and what do we
yeah.
not have control over? Most things we don't have control over, but
Mhm,
this is a way to exercise some control over a very emotional, traumatic thing, whatever it might be. So
mhm.
exercise it if you can.
Yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Until
All
next
right.
week, Mark.
Thanks, Jim.